Thank you for joining us for today's video presentation. After this video teaching, Brenda and I invite you to visit our website, where you will find many free resources and our video archives of previous teachings. Our bookstore has all of our current books and many of our teachings available on DVD. Also, right on the home page is the sign-up form for our email list, where you will receive our exclusive monthly newsletter. With the newsletter, you will get access to exclusive teachings, Bible research tools and resources, a monthly biblical calendar and Bible reading schedule following the traditional Torah portions, and other exclusive materials and access to future special events. We know that you will enjoy the teaching today. Thank you for joining us. Shalom and be blessed.
As Jacob left the Promised Land, he had an encounter with God. Jacob was fleeing an enraged Esau. He was leaving the land that was part of the blessing and promise he had just received from his father Isaac. Jacob was supposed to receive the land, yet he was on his way out of the land. Had he truly received the blessing? Would it really come to him instead of his brother Esau? When Jacob stopped for the night, God appeared to him in a dream. And when Jacob woke up the next morning, we read in Genesis 28:18 that Jacob rose up early. Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. What does it mean that Jacob rose up early? Why is this an important element in the account? I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is Shadows of the Messiah. Jacob rose up early to anoint a pillar, pouring oil on top of it because he recognized that God had met him at that place. In his dream, God had affirmed that the promise would come to him. He would inherit the land, and through him the families of the earth would be blessed. This was an incredible reassurance to Jacob. God went on to offer additional reassurance. Even though Jacob was leaving the land of his inheritance, God would be with him. Genesis 28:15. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. When Jacob got up the next morning, he immediately acted on his dream and the message that God had given him. Erecting the pillar was an affirmation that God had met him in that place. When Jacob had awoken in the night after his dream, he exclaimed that the place was the house of God. Genesis 28:16 and 17. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." He named the place Bethel, meaning the house of God. The presence of the pillar Jacob erected would remind Jacob of this event. We all need reminders of events in our lives, especially those times when we hear from God. It's too easy for us to forget about these events and wander away from God. We forget the instances when we know without a doubt that God has sent us a special message or acted for our good. Jacob set up this pillar to remind himself of this event, but there was more to this event. Jacob responded to God's message, vowing that God would be his only God. Genesis 28:20 through 22. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you." Jacob began his vow with a conditional statement. If God would be with him, then Jacob would tithe to God. When we read this, we immediately think that Jacob is testing God and asking, in a sense, if God would really do what he said. This could be the understanding of the text, but we can also interpret this to mean that Jacob is questioning his own worthiness for God to choose him. In a sense, he is that child who receives an unexpected gift and responds, "Is it really mine? Do I get to keep it?" Jacob's actions in immediately setting up a pillar of remembrance suggest that it is the excitement of the unexplained and perhaps undeserved gift that prompts Jacob's words. Jacob goes on his way reassured of God's presence and that he will come back to the land and that his descendants would inherit it. The phrases rose up early, rose early, and rising early are all idioms for not delaying to begin or complete a task. Abraham rose early on the day he sent Hagar and Ishmael away. He rose early on the day he began the journey to offer up Isaac. Moses rose up early the day after receiving the tablets of the commandments to begin the offerings to God. On the negative side, the children of Israel rose up early to worship the golden calf that they had made. God tells us that He has always risen early to instruct His people to obey His voice. Jeremiah 11:7. For I earnestly exhorted your fathers in the day I brought them out of the land of Egypt, until this day, rising early and exhorting, saying, Obey my voice. When Judah had turned away from God and judgment was about to fall, God said He rose up early to send His servants the prophets to warn them about coming judgment. The book of Jeremiah has numerous references to God sending His prophets to instruct them, warn them, and call them back. One such passage is Jeremiah 25:3-5. From the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, even to this day, this is the 23rd year in which the word of the Lord has come to me, and I have spoken to you, rising early and speaking, but you have not listened. And the Lord has sent to you all His servants the prophets, rising early and sending them, but you have not listened nor inclined your ear to hear. They said, Repent now every one of his evil way and his evil doings, and dwell in the land that the Lord has given to you and your fathers forever and ever. Judah did not listen to God's words through the prophet Jeremiah or the other prophets. During Jeremiah's lifetime, Judah was taken into captivity and the temple of God was destroyed. Whenever we read one of these phrases about rising early, we need to pay attention. The task it refers to is one of importance. As an example, God tells the children of Israel not to delay to bring their offerings, especially the offering of the firstborn. Exodus 22:29 and 30. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. The firstborn of all that opened the womb belonged to God, including the sons. The sons were all redeemed, as were the firstborn of the donkeys. However, the firstborn of all the livestock were not to be redeemed. They belonged to God. Exodus 13:12 and 13. That you shall set apart to the Lord all that open the womb, that is, every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have, the male shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. Bringing the firstborn to God was a reminder, like Jacob's pillar, of all that God had done for them in bringing them out of Egypt. Exodus 13:14. So it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, What is this? That you shall say to him, By strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It is in the context of bringing the firstborn that we read about the command not to boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Exodus 23:19. The first of the firstfruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. The word boil is the Hebrew word bashal, number 1310 in Strong's Concordance, meaning to boil up, something to be done in cooking, or figuratively to ripen. It is used in the sense of ripen in Genesis 40 verse 10, referring to ripe grapes. It is used in reference to the ripe harvest in Joel 3 verse 10. It is possible that the commandment not to boil a young goat in its mother's milk refers to the tendency to delay offering the firstborn. It was to be brought to the Lord on the 8th day. They were not to allow the young goat to ripen in its mother's milk. God also instructs the children of Israel not to delay in fulfilling a vow. Deuteronomy 23, verse 21. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. This takes us back to the story of Jacob. There at the pillar he had erected at the place he named Bethel, house of God, Jacob vowed to bring a tithe of all that God had given him during his exile from the land. When Jacob returned to the land, he delayed going to Bethel and bringing his offering. Instead, Jacob settled near Shechem. Genesis 33, 18 through 20. Then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. And he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected an altar there and called it El Elohi Israel. Jacob purchased property and built an altar to God that he named God, the God of Israel. Jacob partially fulfilled his vow. He declared on the altar that he built that God was his God. However, he did not go to Bethel and bring the tithe that he had promised to God. He did not rise up early and go to Bethel to fulfill his vow. Genesis chapter 34 opens with the account of the abduction and rape of his daughter Dinah. Genesis 34, 1 and 2. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. The chapter continues with the reaction of Dinah's brothers and the ultimate slaughter of every man of Shechem. Genesis 34, 27 through 29. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all their wealth. All their little ones and their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. Nowhere in this account is there a single mention of God. Jacob, Dinah, and the sons of Jacob acted outside the protection and will of God. The sages write that as a result of not fulfilling his vow immediately, Jacob forfeited God's protection over him and his family. Although God had protected Jacob from harm from Laban and later from Esau, this was not the case with Dinah. The Stone Edition Chumash in the commentary on Parsha Vayishlach writes, in the case of Dinah, however, Jacob's failure to promptly carry out his vow caused him to forfeit this divine aura of protection. As a result, there was no miraculous intercession to protect Dinah from Shechem. A further outgrowth of the incident was that the surrounding cities hated Jacob and his family, frightening them and putting them in jeopardy. After the slaughter in Shechem, Jacob was terrified of the reaction of the people in the region. At that point, he was ready to hear from God. God's message was that Jacob needed to fulfill his vow. Genesis 35:1. Then God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau your brother." While in Shechem, it appears that Jacob had forgotten the events at Bethel. Although he built an altar to God to remind himself that God was his God, his family began to accumulate idols and foreign gods. Jacob remembered his vow and instructed his family to get rid of all the idols they had collected. Genesis 35, 2 through 4. And Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me in the way which I have gone." So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods which were in their hands, and the earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree which was by Shechem. Jacob followed God's words and traveled to Bethel. As he did so, God's protection was once again over Jacob. Now, instead of Jacob being terrified, we read that terror came on all the people of the region. Genesis 35:5. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Jacob came to Bethel and finally fulfilled his vow. He built an altar to God at Bethel, which he named not after himself, but after God. He named it El Bethel, which means God, the house of God. After Jacob built the altar and brought his offerings, God appeared to him once again and confirmed that Jacob's name was now Israel. Israel has the literal meaning of prince with God, and the figurative meaning of one who struggles with God and prevails, from the context of Genesis 33, which contains the story of how Jacob was given the name Israel. Jacob had used the name Israel in his altar at Shechem, but now God confirms that Israel is Jacob's new name. Genesis 35:10. And God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob any more, but Israel shall be your name." So he called his name Israel. Jacob brought disaster on his house by failing to immediately perform the act he promised to fulfill. Delaying to act when we know we should act can be harmful to us and to others. It can result in a delayed or even a missed blessing. When Yeshua was crucified, he was put into the grave so quickly that he was not buried with the proper spices and anointments. When the Sabbath passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome rose up early to anoint Yeshua's body. Mark 16:1 and 2. Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. Because they arrived early, they were the first to know that Yeshua had risen from the dead. They were met at the tomb by an angel who proclaimed that Yeshua had risen from the dead. Mark 16:6. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him?" If they had delayed in acting, they would have missed the blessing of receiving the message of Yeshua's resurrection straight from the mouth of the angel. As early as they had risen up, though, Yeshua rose up even earlier. Mark 16:9. Now when he arose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons. Yeshua didn't delay going to those who loved him with the message that he was alive. Mary Magdalene, one who rose early, was the first one he appeared to. After encountering Yeshua, she immediately went to others and shared the good news with them. The angel who met the women, including Mary Magdalene, at the tomb, had told them to share the good news, but they were afraid. Mark 16:7 and 8. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into the Galilee. There you will see him as he said to you. So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. After meeting Yeshua, Mary was no longer afraid. She and the other women with her told the disciples that Yeshua had risen from the grave. Luke 24:9 and 10. Then they returned from the tomb and told all these things to the 11 and all the rest. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. Yeshua has given us a commandment to go. Matthew 28:19 and 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things that I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. We are to rise up early and go. Like Jacob, God has promised to go with us. We are to make disciples as we go, teaching them all about God and Yeshua. We are to live our lives in such a way that others would want to follow Yeshua also. We are not to delay allowing God to transform us into the image of His Son. We are not to delay doing good and loving one another. Jacob rose up early. Thanks for watching today. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this has been Shadows of the Messiah. Shalom and be blessed.